Let's talk about the day Rome fell. Back in 387 BC, the city, which was just this rising power in Italy, suffered a humiliation so deep it would literally haunt them for centuries. It was sacked, its leaders were killed, and its pride was completely shattered by a band of Gallic warriors. So we're going to dive into this incredible story of collapse, of legend, and the psychological scar that, you could argue, set Rome on the path to building an empire.
Now, it's a question we see again and again throughout history. And for the early Roman Republic, the answer was absolutely brutal, terrifying, and in the end, totally transformative. This wasn't just some battle they lost. It was an existential crisis. It forced the Romans to stare their own vulnerability right in the face.
So the traditional story, it's all about Roman honor being tested and, of course, in the end, restored. But history is never that neat and tidy, is it? As we're about to see, the tale that the Romans told themselves for generations, this epic story of a last-minute rescue, well, it might just be a carefully constructed myth, something designed to cover up an even deeper shame.
So how did it all begin? Well, it wasn't with some grand clash of empires. Nope. It started with a messy, almost petty diplomatic incident that just spiraled completely out of control. It's really a classic case of arrogance leading straight to catastrophe.
Okay, let's break down this absolute train wreck of events. It all kicks off when the city of Clusium asks Rome for a hand against these Senones Gauls. Rome says, sure, we'll mediate, and sends 3 ambassadors from the super-powerful Fabii family. But here's the huge mistake. Instead of staying neutral, they jump into the fight, and one of them actually kills a Gallic chieftain. For the Gauls, this was an unforgivable insult. They demanded justice, but the Roman Senate, they refused. And then, in this stunning act of arrogance, the Roman people elected those same guys as their military leaders. The Gauls were furious. Their new target was Rome.
So, the Roman army marches out to meet the Gauls at the river Allia, just 11 miles from the city. They were confident, maybe a little too confident. What happened next would be burned into the Roman memory forever as a day of national shame.
Now, here's where things get really interesting, especially when you look at the numbers. Ancient historians, writing way later, they paint this picture of a massive Roman army, anywhere from 24,000 to 40,000 soldiers. But modern historians, they're way more skeptical. They suggest the battle might have been a much smaller affair, maybe closer to 5,000 on each side. And this difference is so important because it's our first clue that the story might have been blown way out of proportion over time.
Yeah, regardless of the numbers, the result was an absolute catastrophe. The Gallic charge just shattered the Roman lines. The historian Livy tells us the Romans totally panicked, threw down their weapons, and just fled in a chaotic mob. It wasn't a battle, it was a rout. Many were cut down, others, weighed down by all their armor, drowned trying to cross the Tiber River. And get this, most of the survivors didn't even run back to Rome. They fled to the nearby city of Veii because they were convinced their own city was already lost.
The victorious Gauls were apparently so shocked by how easy their victory was that they actually hesitated for a few days. But when they finally got to Rome, they found the gates wide open. The walls were completely undefended. The whole city was just theirs for the taking.
Just try to imagine this scene. The Gauls wander into the Roman Forum, and they find the city's elderly elite, these old patricians and former leaders, just sitting silently in their ceremonial chairs, dressed in their finest robes. According to Livy, the Gauls were just awestruck. They stared at them like they were statues of gods. For a moment, there was this strange, tense peace.
But that spell was shattered in an instant. A Gaul reached out and stroked the long white beard of one of the old men. Well, the patrician, insulted, took his ivory staff and whacked the warrior on the head. And with that one single act of defiance, the slaughter began. The elders were butchered right where they sat, and the Gauls started looting and burning the city.
Rome's only remaining defenders were all holed up in the fortress on Capitoline Hill. So one night, the Gauls find a secret path and start a silent climb. The guards are asleep, the dogs are quiet. Rome is literally moments from being completely extinguished. But then comes one of the most famous animal rescues in history. The sacred geese in the Temple of Juno started cackling like crazy, waking up a soldier named Marcus Manlius. He managed to throw the first Gaul off the cliff and wake up the other defenders. The capital was saved, but the siege just dragged on.
With both sides starving, the Romans on the Capitoline Hill finally agreed to pay the Gauls to leave, 1,000 pounds of gold. And this leads to the most humiliating moment in the entire story.
So, as they're weighing out the gold, the Romans start complaining that the Gauls are using rigged scales.
In response, the Gallic chieftain Brennus takes his heavy sword, throws it onto the scales, demanding even more gold. And when the Romans protested, he uttered those infamous words, Via victis, woe to the vanquished. It was the ultimate insult, basically a declaration that the losers have no rights.
Now come on, a moment of total shame like that, it couldn't be the end of the story, could it? This is where Roman storytellers jump in to save the day. They created a hero, but what if that hero was a complete myth?
So according to the legend, just before the last bit of gold is weighed, the exiled Roman general Camillus bursts into the forum with a whole army. He declares the ransom void, proclaiming that Romans redeemed their city not with gold, but with iron. A battle breaks out right there in the ruined streets, and Camillus completely wipes out the Gallic army. It's a fantastic, patriotic, perfect ending.
But here's the twist. This amazing heroic story starts to totally unravel when you look closer. Crucial early historians like Polybius, they never even mention Camillus. Kind of strange, right? Other sources claim it was an allied Etruscan army that recovered the gold. Even Aristotle said the rescue was thanks to a certain Lucius. And maybe the most damning evidence of all, archaeology finds very little evidence of a massive citywide fire, which suggests the sack was more of a raid for treasure. The conclusion seems pretty obvious. The story of Camillus was probably a myth, invented later to erase the shame of having to pay a ransom.
Myth or not, the invasion left a deep and lasting trauma on the Roman psyche. It was a psychological scar that would shape Roman policy for centuries to come.
The memory of this defeat was literally written into their calendar. The date of the battle, July 18th, became known as the Dies Alliensis, the Day of the Allia. It was considered an unlucky day, a day when no public or official business could happen. It was a national day of bad omen.
And you can see their physical reaction too. Immediately after the Gauls left, the Romans started building a massive new set of walls, the Servian Wall. It was this enormous project, 11 kilometers long, and it was built from stone they'd quarried from the land of their recently conquered enemy, Veii. This wall was a literal shield built out of fear.
And that fear ran incredibly deep. How deep? Deep enough to make the Romans do something absolutely unthinkable. This number, 3, represents the number of times in later centuries that Rome, gripped by what they called metos Gallicus, or Gallic terror, actually resorted to human sacrifice. They buried pairs of Gauls and Greeks alive in a public square just to ward off another invasion, a horrifying ritual that was completely alien to their own traditions.
So this all brings us to a final, really compelling question. Did this moment of near-total annihilation, this deep-seated fear of being brought to their knees ever again, did it forge a new, ruthless determination in the Romans? Did the vow of never again set them on this aggressive path of expansion and conquest just to make sure no foreign enemy could ever threaten their city again? It's entirely possible that the road to the Roman Empire began not with an act of strength, but with a memory of profound, terrifying weakness.